What if the very patterns holding you back are not fate, but echoes of your own unconscious? Carl Jung taught that until we confront what is hidden, it will rule our lives in silence. Today we face the truth of the child-woman syndrome, the signs of emotional immaturity that keep us stuck. This is your call to awaken, to recognize yourself in these reflections, and to step boldly into the journey of true maturity. Carl Jung often reminded us that immaturity is not simply a lack of years, but a lack of integration within the psyche. When we speak of the child-woman, we are not judging age. We are describing a psychological state where development has paused, where the inner self remains tied to dependency and avoidance. The signs of this emotional immaturity are subtle yet powerful: difficulty in making independent decisions, the constant search for someone to take responsibility, and the inability to endure discomfort without seeking immediate relief. In Jung's view, this is not weakness of character, but the influence of an archetype, an unconscious pattern that governs behavior until it is brought into awareness. When a woman embodies the child-woman psychology, she often finds herself clinging to roles of helplessness, using charm or fragility as a way to escape responsibility. She may seek protection rather than autonomy, expecting life to provide saviors instead of cultivating inner strength. This is why Jung insisted that we look beyond the surface, for behind the persona of innocence is a deeper fear of individuation, the fear of becoming whole and accountable. Such immaturity is not always visible to the person experiencing it, because it feels natural, as though life simply happens this way. But to remain in this unconscious state is to let the archetype dominate, repeating the same patterns again and again. Jung believed education of the inner world begins with recognition. By observing the signs, by naming the patterns of childlike behavior in adult women, the individual begins to loosen the grip of the unconscious. Awareness is the first act of liberation, for only when the child-woman archetype is recognized can transformation into maturity begin. Carl Jung taught that every archetype carries both light and shadow, and the child-woman is no exception. On the surface, she may appear innocent, tender, even enchanting in her fragility. Yet Jung would caution us that this appearance hides a deeper truth. The shadow side of the child-woman is resistance to growth, a quiet refusal to accept the weight of reality. What begins as charm can evolve into manipulation, where helplessness is used as a shield against responsibility. This form of emotional underdevelopment is not simply immaturity, it is the unconscious archetype asserting its dominance. Jung observed that when we do not confront these hidden forces, they begin to live our lives for us. In the case of the child-woman, the shadow manifests in a cycle of dependence, often sabotaging relationships and opportunities. She avoids challenges not because she cannot face them, but because she has internalized the belief that someone else will carry the burden. The tragedy lies in the fact that this avoidance prevents the discovery of true strength. Jung explained that the shadow is not evil, it is simply unrecognized energy. In the shadow side of the child-woman, there is a hidden vitality that could become courage, responsibility, and wisdom if only it were integrated. But until that happens, the archetype distorts behavior, creating patterns that repeat endlessly. To study these dynamics is to see how the unconscious shapes life without consent. Jung's work invites us to uncover the shadow, not to condemn it, but to transform it. Only by acknowledging the immaturity, the manipulations, and the fear of adulthood can the energy trapped in the child-woman archetype be released, turning what was once bondage into the beginning of authentic growth. Carl Jung observed that the deepest truths of our psychology often reveal themselves most clearly in the patterns of our relationships. The child-woman archetype, when active, does not remain hidden in the private corners of the mind. It shapes the way intimacy unfolds, the way dependence is expressed, and the way love is sought. A woman caught in this syndrome often repeats cycles of seeking saviors rather than partners, expecting others to fulfill the unmet needs of childhood. Jung would describe this as the unconscious projecting its longings onto others, attempting to resolve within relationships what has not yet been addressed within the self. In these dynamics, responsibility is frequently avoided, while emotional volatility becomes a tool for attention or validation. The relationship becomes less about mutual growth and more about the preservation of a role, one as protector, the other as the child who must be cared for. Jung emphasized that such patterns are not deliberate choices, but expressions of archetypal energy moving unconsciously. The child woman believes she is acting freely, yet in truth, the archetype is acting through her, repeating the same dramas until awareness is achieved. These relationship patterns reveal the tension between the child archetype and the mature woman archetype, where the potential for equality is constantly undermined by the pull toward dependency. Jung's analysis invites us to see that the unconscious seeks wholeness, but without conscious integration, it will repeat fragments of unresolved need. Recognizing these cycles allows for the possibility of individuation, where one begins to move from seeking completion through others to cultivating it within. In doing so, the patterns that once led to imbalance can evolve into relationships of genuine partnership, where growth is shared and love becomes a path to wholeness rather than a substitute for it. Carl Jung believed that the path to wholeness, what he called individuation, is not about rejecting parts of ourselves but integrating them into a greater unity. The child-woman archetype, with all its charm and fragility, is not something to be erased but something to be transformed. Jung emphasized that every archetype contains seeds of potential, and within the child-woman lies creativity, spontaneity, and a sense of wonder that, when integrated, can enrich a mature personality. Yet when this archetype is left unconscious, it binds the individual in a state of arrested development, unable to face life's demands with strength. To move beyond the limitations of this state, one must confront the fear of responsibility and the discomfort of growth. Jung taught that confronting the unconscious is always uncomfortable, for it demands that we see aspects of ourselves we would rather deny. For the child woman, this means recognizing the allure of dependency and admitting how it prevents authentic freedom. The journey toward individuation is the act of bringing light into this darkness, allowing the energy once trapped in immaturity to become fuel for maturity. It is not a rejection of innocence, but a transformation of innocence into wisdom. Jung described this process as a union of opposites, the merging of the child archetype with the mature woman archetype, so that neither is denied but both are integrated. In this synthesis, playfulness can coexist with responsibility, vulnerability with strength, and imagination with grounded action. What was once fragility becomes resilience. What was once avoidance becomes courage. For Jung, individuation was the highest calling of the psyche, and in the case of the child woman, it is the invitation to step fully into life, not by abandoning her past self, but by embracing it as part of a larger, more complete whole. Carl Jung often reminded us that the journey of the psyche is not a straight road, but a process of uncovering, confronting, and integrating what lies within. The child-woman syndrome is not a label of shame, but a mirror that reveals where growth has stalled, and where the unconscious still holds power. We have seen how immaturity manifests in subtle, but repeating patterns, how the shadow side of the archetype resists growth, how relationships become entangled in cycles of dependency, and how individuation offers a path beyond limitation. To face these truths is not to condemn, but to awaken. Jung believed that when the unconscious is brought into awareness, what once enslaved us becomes the very material of transformation. The child-woman archetype, when integrated, offers creativity, sensitivity, and wonder. When left unexamined, it breeds fragility, avoidance, and repetition. The choice lies in whether we remain possessed by the archetype or choose to confront it with courage. The task is not easy, but as Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Yet beyond that pain lies freedom, the freedom of becoming whole, the freedom of living not as a fragment, but as a complete self. And so the call is clear: do not run from the patterns that hold you, study them, confront them, and integrate them. For in doing so, you step out of the cycle of immaturity and into the fullness of your true being.